Rookie wide receiver Tyler Scott gives the Chicago Bears speed and playmaking ability in an offense that's already really fast.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we really appreciate all of you who tune in every day, the everydayers. We call you 5 days a week. On the show today, we will be joined by another Locked On Podcast Network host from Locked On Bearcats to break down Cincinnati wide receiver Tyler Scott. We're going to kind of go through his college career and try and figure out exactly how that might project into the NFL from a guy who was a running back in high school to a receiver in college who really blossomed in his final year and is now coming to the Chicago Bears to try and take that track speed to the NFL. I think you'll learn a lot from our friend Alex Frank from Locked On Bearcats here. And then we'll come back and look at this Bears wide receiver core as it stands now, pretty well set entering the training camp and the regular season for the most part. We kind of know what the group is going to look like, and I think there's a couple of clear dynamics that we'll need to keep an eye on here moving forward. But let's start going a little bit out of order with our draft pick analysis. The last couple of weeks, or last week, the last couple of podcasts, we did Darnell Wright, followed by Javon Dexter and Tyreek Stevenson. We're going to get to Zach Pickens here in a little bit, and we're going to get to Rashawn Johnson as well, but we're jumping ahead to Tyler Scott here, mixing it up, going to the wide receivers with our friends from Locked On Bearcats. Joining us now on the Locked On Bears podcast is Alex Frank. He's the host of Locked On Bearcats here on the Locked On Podcast Network. He's also a producer for ABC6 in Columbus, Ohio. Alex, really appreciate you joining us today. It's a big year for Cincinnati in the draft, I think, comparatively to, the long history of the school. How was this draft weekend for you?
Well, first off, Lauren, it's great to be on with you. Great to talk Bearcats with you. Look, the Bearcats draft this year, last year they had 9 draft picks. So this year they weren't going to duplicate that, unfortunately. But I still think overall, 3 draft picks, 7 undrafted free agents. Very good draft for the Bearcats with some players, some homegrown players, Ohioans. So really good draft. And I like that the teams they went to, particularly Tyler Scott going to the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, let's talk about him. As far as like the pre-draft process went, from the time Cincinnati's season ended, I think he opted out of the bowl game, but when he declared for the draft, where did you expect him to go on draft day? And then as a result, was what did you think about him lasting to the 4th round where he did?
Well, I think when he entered the draft, I thought he was going to be a really good mid-round steal because he's a guy who can really elevate an offense with his ability with yards after the catch. He's a streaky downfield receiver. He's got tremendous speed. He had a great 40 time at his pro day. I'm trying to remember what his 40 time was in the combine off the top of my head. But what I'm saying is I thought he was going to be a mid-round draft pick, 2nd through 4th. And it turns out that's where he was, the 4th round. And again, I think this draft had so many unpredictable elements to it. Heck, Ivan Pace Jr., if you would have told me that he was going to go undrafted, I would have never believed you. But then again, Tyler Scott, I think, lasted until the 4th round. I thought he was going to go somewhere around there. 4th round's still really good. It's, 1st round of the last day. So there's still a lot of attention, I feel like. It's a great pick. It's a great environment for him. You go to a historic franchise like the Bears. You go to a great fan base. You stay in the Midwest. It's a great fit for him. I'm excited to see what he can do in terms of his chances of making the Bears roster. But from the moment that he entered the draft, I felt like he was going to be a great pick for whoever got him. I was hoping he would go to a team that needed a receiver like Tyler Scott, the ability to run after the catch. Now, he ran a 4.39 40-yard dash. He ran a 6.993 cone drill. I don't really put much stock into that. He is a little undersized. He's only 5'9", 7/8", 177 pounds, which, I mean, you can get by with that, I feel like, as a wide receiver. But there are some big wide receivers, as we know. The Bengals have one in T. Higgins. But, I mean, the Bears have had some. I mean, Brandon Marshall was that, and I think Alshon Jeffrey was too. But I do think you can find some value with Tyler Scott, especially when you have a quarterback like Justin Fields. And you know more about him than I do, covering the Bears daily. But he's got a really good arm. And if now that you have a downfield weapon with such speed, I mean, this was a guy, and I said this, Lorin, in my pre-draft video that I did for Locked On Podcast Network. Tyler Scott, in his career with the Cincinnati Bearcats, averaged 16.5 yards per catch. 16.5. That's almost 2 first downs per catch. And that, I mean, that can flip the field. And for a Bears offense that has struggled over the last few seasons, you need someone like that. Move the chains, get you 2 first downs, flip the field. I mean, the Bears defense has not been a problem. So help them out a little bit on offense with the speedster receiver like Tyler Scott, who's versatile. It's not just the streaky downfield plays. He can run any route. He's great after the catch. He's got good footwork. This is a guy I think who could do really well for the Bears.
Yeah, I know. Like one of the popular stats that gets thrown around for him in Chicago now is that like all 12 or whatever of his touchdowns were of 20 plus yards downfield in college. How much of those were like, deep shots that were like it's 20 yards before the catch, it's just in the air, versus plays he might have caught underneath or shorter and then made 20 plus yards after the catch to make it a big play touchdown after.
So Tyler Scott had 14 touchdowns in his 5 in 2021, 9 in 2022. I think there's a combination of both from what I'm remembering. Obviously, he was more of a downfield guy from what I remember, but there was a touchdown catch he had against Temple in 21 where it was a simple 10-yard completion, and then he just turned on the Jets down the sidelines, juked the defender, whoosh, he's in the end zone. There was a play earlier this season where he caught a pass on the far sideline and then took it all the way into the end zone. That was against Indiana. But mostly what I remember was his first ever career touchdown with the Bearcats was an 81-yard touchdown on the second play from scrimmage against Miami, where he streaked down the field. Desmond Ridder uncorked a gorgeous deep ball, and it was, vertical go. There was a 53-yard touchdown against SMU that he had in 2021 where he ran a go route. But there was also, there was one of his more memorable touchdowns was a simple 25-yard, I think it was a post pattern, 25-yard post pattern against Houston in the conference title game. I remember being on the field for that game working for ABC Sports. So you're going to get both, Lorin, but more so I think you're going to get the vertical, the downfield threat that he is, because that's where he thrives. And if Justin Fields, and one of my favorite memories of Fields in college was a long touchdown pass that he had in the Sugar Bowl against Clemson in the playoff. I think Olave was on the receiving end of it. Mm-hmm. If that can translate to Chicago with Tyler Scott, this Bears offense is going to be much better than it's been in years past.
This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Built Bar, the world's best tasting protein bars. I've got some more Built Bars on the way to my house right now. I can't wait to get some more because they taste so good, but they're actually really good for you. Built Bars taste like candy bars, but they have the nutrients of a protein bar, and I eat one literally every single day. They're soft, easy to chew, covered in 100% real chocolate. They taste like candy bars, but they're low sugar, low calories, high fiber, and high protein. There's not another protein bar product on the market that tastes this good while still being high enough in protein and low sugar and low calories. Trust me, tasting is believing. You can check out all of their amazing flavors over at built.com, or you can get them even quicker at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. If you head into the pharmacy section in Walmart over by the protein bars, you can pick up a 4-bar box of their cookies and cream bar, double chocolate bar, or coconut puffs. And if you're close to a Sam's Club, you can run in and grab a 13-bar box of two of my favorite flavors, Brownie Batter Puff and the Churro Puffs. Try them for yourself. Check them out at Built.com. And once you taste them, you'll thank me later. How would you describe Scott's speed? I mean, we know he's fast. We know he was a track guy in high school, but like, is it like, Mike Vick in Madden 04, kind of like unfair speed? Or is it just more like, when he's running down the sideline, no one can quite keep up with him? Like how extreme was the speed that you saw at Cincinnati?
I mean, look, Michael Vick's transcendent. I don't know if Tyler Scott is that, but he's pretty dang fast. Obviously, Michael Vick was just elusive in addition to being fast. Tyler Scott's just fast. I mean, he can run down the field. Tyler Scott does have great footwork. But, I mean, you're going to get a guy, his speed, I would say it's electric. I mean, he can rally a crowd with any big play. You need a big play, Tyler Scott can go and get it. If you have a strong arm quarterback, you can send him as far down the field as you want to send him. He has the ability to take the top off a defense, which in the NFL, you need to do that.
What do you remember about the recruiting process for him coming in? I know he was a high school running back and kind of recruited as an athlete and had to learn wide receiver. Like, I know he was only a 3-star, so it wasn't like this big landed prospect, but like, were there expectations for him coming in? And I guess, how did you sort of see his college trajectory playing off of from the time he came to campus to the time he left, like how that process went from year to year?
So he was obviously, as you mentioned, a running back in high school. He ran track. So I knew he was going to be fast when he came to Cincinnati. What I remember most about his early career, his first season was 2020, which was obviously a very truncated year for all of college football. But what's unique is, he came in at a time, Lorin, where you had receivers on the Bearcats named Alec Pierce, second-round pick last year. Ja'Shawn Jackson, he transferred. I really miss Ja'Shawn Jackson, side note. And then you think about other receivers who were here, like, I'm trying to think. You had, I mean, the Bearcats had a bevy of receivers. Trey Tucker was a part of that. Obviously, they were still largely driven through the tight ends with Josh Wiley, and Leonard Taylor was just coming around. They still had a really strong running game. It really, and Lauren, I'm thinking about it now, and I said this a lot on Locked On Bearcats last year, it really wasn't until this year where the Bearcats sort of changed their identity, and I don't think that was necessarily by choice. They changed their identity to being a pass-first offense, and in doing so, you saw how good Tyler Scott was. I mean, he made a jump from receiving on 30 catches rather in 21 to 899 receiving yards on 54. So what I remember most about when he was being recruited, obviously Luke Fickell was targeting Ohio players. Scott is from Norton, Ohio. And what's really interesting is he found his way onto the roster in 21. He had that big catch against Miami. He had 4 other touchdowns the rest of the season. And I just remember he was a guy who got better and better and better. And what's so great is we all remember former strength coach Brady Collins at Cincinnati. He's moved on, but he could develop players. It didn't matter what position. Offensive line, defensive line, corner with Sauce Gardner, first-round pick from 6th on the depth chart. Same with Tyler Scott. There were a lot of receivers over him, but as time wore on, he developed into a fast guy. Look, is he smaller than some receivers? Yes, but he's still really good.
How did the offense change from 2021 to 2022? You mentioned they go more pass heavy. What did that look like, and how did that affect Tyler Scott?
So the Bearcats historically, and when they're at their best, they're a run-first team. And look, I say that as someone who saw every play of Desmond Ritter's 4-year career. The Bearcats still were a run-first team. Their running backs over the years have been really good. But last year, they lost Jake Renfro, who was going to be their starting center, to a knee injury just a few days before the season opener. The offensive line didn't turn out to be as good as we expected. So the Bearcats had to change, I think, and thinking about it now, from a run-first approach to a passing attack. They had a quarterback in Ben Bryant who wasn't very mobile, but he had what scouts describe as an NFL arm. So they realized, hey, we've got Tyler Scott, Nick Martiner, who's now with Auburn, transferred this offseason. But last year, Nick Martiner was this 6'6" wide receiver who could make contested catches on the perimeter and also run go routes because of his height. So the Bearcats kind of changed their offense a little bit. They obviously lost Jerome Ford, who was a power back in 21. Last year, the running backs, Corey Kiner was still new. Ryan Montgomery's not a power back. He's more of a change of pace back, sort of like an Austin Eckler. So what's interesting, or in your case for the Bears, how about this name for you, Matt Forte? Remember him? So the offense did change in ways that I didn't expect, but that allowed Tyler Scott to develop into a NFL caliber wide receiver.
Were you surprised that Trey Tucker was drafted before him, or was that what you were expecting?
I mean, with no offense to your boy Q, and I'm sure he'll tell you this, are you surprised the Raiders reached for someone? I mean, and I think Trey Tucker's really good. Yeah. But the Raiders saw something in him, I think, too, and Tyler Scott didn't do this. Tyler Scott wasn't a kick returner. Trey Tucker is. And as Q told me, recently, the Raiders haven't had a kick returner or special teams element in so long. So, no, I'm not surprised Trey Tucker went before Tyler Scott. Trey Tucker had been there longer. He had played longer. He had more roles. But, it's just great that we saw two wide receivers for a school that's not historically known for their wide receivers outside of Alec Pierce and Marty Gilliard, perhaps. And I guess Shaq Washington, will throw him in there too. It doesn't surprise me that Tucker went before Scott. I'm just happy both of them got drafted. I think both of them you're going to see potentially on NFL rosters next year.
Oh, absolutely. So where do you sort of set expectations in the NFL for Tyler Scott? Like, where do you see like the range of outcomes for him? Like, as far as like what the ceiling might look like in the league versus what the floor might look like, as far as the high end and the low end of what he could be in the pros.
I compare him to this name, Gabriel Davis. And I say that because Gabriel Davis is this big play wide receiver. That's who Tyler Scott is. I think his ceiling is he's going to take the top off of defense. He's going to have these explosive performances, whether it be in the regular season or as Gabriel Davis did to the Chiefs in the playoffs just 2 years ago. I think his floor would be because, and I just remember his last snap as a Bearcat, he dropped a wide open pass. He could have taken all the way to the house for a touchdown. I'm not sure if you studied that in your Tyler Scott preps, but look, I think he's got a good floor. I don't really see him, him going below that. I think his ceiling's really high. I think he's got great potential to be, I'm not sure if he's going to be a possession receiver like a Julio Jones, or obviously he's not as big as Julio Jones, or a Brandon Marshall. I'm not sure if he's a 100-catch guy, but what I'm saying is he can be like a 60-catch guy that gets 1,000+ yards because he averages 16.5 yards per catch. So that's what I see from him. He's a big play wide receiver, like a Gabriel Davis, I'm trying to think of another wide receiver who's got Mike Williams, for instance. Yeah. Now, Mike Williams is much bigger than Scott, but you get where I'm saying. He's like that, like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling as well, like those guys.
Like never a true number one, but a guy who can be a big playmaker for your offense.
Well, he can be a number one. I mean, it depends on, is there who would you say right now? Let me ask you this, Lorin. Who would you say right now is a number one wide receiver?
Like in the NFL or in Chicago?
On the Bears, excuse me.
Yeah, with DJ Moore coming in, he's going to be the number one, and Mooney will probably be the number two. But there's certainly room there for the Bears are not a size at wide receiver kind of team. They're happy to let smaller guys, grow into those kind of bigger roles that way.
Yeah, I think that's really good.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Alex, you've been really great having on the podcast today. Let everybody know where they can find your work if they want to go back and find anything you've done on Tyler Scott or future Cincinnati Bearcats coverage you provide.
Well, you can find me at Frankie_Natty on Twitter. You can find Locked On Bearcats on YouTube or free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. And, of course, add Locked On Cats on Twitter.
Excellent. Alex, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Lorin, thank you so much. Best wishes to you, and hope to see Tyler Scott on the Bears roster this season.
Thanks again to Alex Frank from Locked On Bearcats for joining us on the podcast today. You can check out Locked On Bearcats for more Cincinnati coverage, but I want to look more specifically into this Chicago Bears wide receiving core. now, because Scott comes in clearly at a position that the Bears have tried to upgrade this year, and Scott's not going to come in and be a week one rookie starter the way Darnell Mooney kind of burst onto the scene early on. But I do think Scott can come in and play a role right away. Like, we know the wide receiver depth chart in terms of the players is kind of, and not that it's set in stone, but we feel like it's pretty clearly DJ Moore is the number one receiver. Darnell Mooney will be your number two. Chase Claypool is number three, but is kind of pushing for those number two spots. And then Tyler Scott is probably your number four, but competing with Velus Jones and Dante Pettis and Equinemius St. Brown. And those guys are going to kind of compete for the last, two or three or four wide receiver spots, depending on how many receivers they ultimately end up keeping. We can be certain that Scott's a lock to make the 53-man roster. Velus Jones likely a lock to make the 53-man roster. So I think those five are going to be there somewhere. And it's a question of, is St. Brown number six? Is Pettis number six? Do you keep both of them? Is there an undrafted free agent guy who can come in and take away one of those spots as a potential special teams player? But when you look like big picture at this receiving core, I think what stands out to me, Scott coming in at, 5'10", 177 odd pounds, it's, a smaller, lighter receiver, but of course, that's not what he's here for, right? He's not a big-bodied catch guy. He's a speed, playmaking before and after the catch type of player. But it's not a one-to-one skill set comparison to Darnell Mooney there or DJ Moore, but like all three of those guys are a little bit on the smaller side. Like Moore is a full 6 feet tall and 210. Like he's thick, and he's strong. But Chase Claypool is really the only like long, tall receiver that's going to be a big contributor in this offense. Mooney's 5'10", 175 odd pounds, very similar in size to Tyler Scott, and Moore's a little bit bigger and stronger, but not like long catch radius, jump ball, box him out down the sideline type of receiver. Like it's kind of just Chase Claypool in this receiver room. And that's what's so interesting to me is like they've got a lot of great speed. You look at the 40-yard dash times for some of these Bears players. I mean, Tyler Scott ran a 4.37 or 4.39 at his pro day. Darnell Mooney's a 4.4 guy. DJ Moore has been a 4.4 guy. I think Chase Claypool ran a 4.4. Khalil Herbert is a 4.4 speed guy. And we know how fast Justin Fields is. Like, you can get a lineup out there where all of your playmakers on the field are super, super fast, like big time speed in this offense that we haven't quite seen this universally across the board, right? The Bears have had fast receivers before, but like you can get a whole lineup out there of everybody is fast and everybody scares you a little bit with the ball in their hand and some of that playmaking ability after the catch. But I do feel like the lack of other size they have at wide receiver, and I mean size specifically in length, arm length and height and catch radius, puts a lot of pressure on Chase Claypool to be that guy, right? He doesn't need to step in and be a true number one receiver, 1,000-yard guy on the outside dominating up and down the field. That shouldn't be the expectation, right? He's never been a 1,000-yard guy before. He needs to be a lot better this year than he was last year. He needs to play more like the rookie year Chase Claypool that we saw really come onto the scene. Like that's kind of what we're shooting for this year, Bar. But presumably he should be in a better position to do so when you add guys like Tyler Scott. And of course, adding DJ Moore kind of lifts all boats in this rising tide here. And so like that was one of the criticisms of Chase Claypool. I remember when towards the end of this past season, we had Matt Waldman from Matt Waldman's rookie scouting portfolio on the Locked On Bears podcast. And he talked about how that first season for Chase Claypool in Pittsburgh, he wasn't really getting a ton of the attention, right? In that, I mean, he was just he was a rookie second round pick. Like it wasn't, he was a nobody. Like they knew who he was, and to make sure that, yeah, you're not just going to ignore a second round pick. But in that offense that year, they had Juju Smith-Schuster and some other options there to where teams were still adjusting to Claypool and not giving him a ton of attention. And then after that year, like into 2021 and beyond, Claypool was like kind of clearly the go-to top option there. They added Deontay Johnson as well, like because all the attention starts going on Chase Claypool. And all of a sudden he gets a lot more of the focus of the coverage, and it becomes harder for him to separate against better cornerbacks pressing him in man-to-man coverage and more safety attention as well, and the production starts to drop down. You would think with guys like Tyler Scott able to take the top off, Darnell Mooney able to take the top off, and of course DJ Moore just being a reliable receiver at all three levels of the field, there should be a lot less attention, at least from defenses, on Claypool. We're going to be paying plenty of attention to Chase Claypool and scrutinizing closely what he does because of the premium pick the Chicago Bears gave up to trade for him. He's going to be under a lot of pressure internally, but as far as opposing defenses, who are you going to put your best guy on? DJ Moore. Who are you going to put your second best guy on? Probably Darnell Mooney. You also have to keep an eye on Justin Fields out of the backfield. So then maybe your third best corner or whatever is then on Claypool. And don't forget Cole Kmet's going to be working over the middle of the field and perhaps a back out of the backfield with some damage ability. So like all of a sudden there's more opportunity for someone like Claypool to really carve out that role as that big bodied guy that there's not really anybody else in the receiver room that can quite do that. Perhaps it also means then when we get down to the red zone, for example, does that mean it's going to be more of a tight end heavier focus there? Because Tyler Scott's not winning red zone jump balls. Darnell Mooney has won some jump balls before, but it's not his skill set exactly. DJ Moore is actually pretty good in the contested catch situation, but again, at 6 feet 210, like he's not the same sort of like 6'4", 240 that Chase Claypool can provide, or that Cole Kmet at 6'5", 260, and Robert Tonyan comes in at like 6'4", 6'5", and he's up 200 and some odd pounds. Like these are the big body boys, and I wonder if in the red zone, because they have all this speed, that's going to be great. And I'm not concerned about the offense being able to execute in the red zone. More so in the red zone, will this become a much more tight end featured group in that area? Are they going to run the ball a lot in the red zone and run play action off of that and just try and get it to the big body tight ends? Because you don't have the big bodies at receiver other than Chase Claypool. And there's not enough space in the red zone and in the end zone for you guys to just be faster than everybody. Like that's when you condense the field, you can't just outrun them because the back of the end zone is 10 yards back there. So like there's not a lot of, you can outrun laterally here and there, but there's less space for guys to be able to, or less space that guys can then pass off zone coverage and keep up with speedy receivers. You don't just have to stick with them and run in man-to-man coverage. So it's harder to win as that speedy receiver in the red zone and in the end zone. That's where Claypool's going to have to step up and these tight ends are going to have to step up. But presumably the type of speed that you have between Moore, Mooney, Scott, and Claypool, and of course Herbert in the backfield and Fields, should make it a lot easier to get into the red zone. And then it's on Luke Getsy to come up with good plays in the red zone, and it's up to Justin Fields to make the right decisions in the red zone. And we've seen Fields himself be a particularly dominant red zone threat as well. So it feels like things are setting up here where you have options. You have different skill sets. You have a lot of speed, but you have big bodies at the tight end. You've got a quarterback with some speed, and okay, there's a lot you can do here with the tools offensively for Luke Getsy, and of course also then for Justin Fields to take that next step. And I think Scott as a whole then will kind of be the fourth option in there. He'll rotate in, kind of like Valdez Scantling was early in his Packers career when they had Devontae Adams and others, where it's like Scantling was never wasn't the number 2 at first, but would get a couple of deep shots and grew into a bigger role. Certainly, Tyler Scott is not anywhere close to Scantling in the way that they're built, but that type of role in Luke Getsy's offense that can be an over-the-top vertical guy, and you can also get Scott the ball underneath screens, drag routes, stuff with space after the catch for him to make some plays. I think we're going to see a few highlight reel moments from Scott this season. It's not going to be 800 yards and 10 touchdowns, but some highlight reel moments with that sprinter speed and that running back background should be a lot of fun to watch. It's going to be fun to watch how all of these rookies progress on the Bears team throughout the course of the season. And we're going to keep going through them this offseason with our Locked On Podcast Network hosts. We're going to do Zach Pickens coming up here. We're also going to do Roshan Johnson from Texas. I don't know that we're going to get into the 5th and 7th round we don't have like a Locked On Kennesaw State host here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We don't do Division II schools just yet, maybe someday, but we'll still get to make sure we know this draft class through and through and make sure we're sticking with you all throughout the offseason, because we don't go anywhere even during the offseason. We're still here for you all offseason long. So make sure then that you hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to Locked On Bears to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. That includes on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. You can catch all of our video podcasts as well. However you do it, just make Locked On Bears your first listen each and every dayer. Become an everydayer on the Locked On Podcast Network. 5 days a week is what we're here for you, and that's each one of those opportunities, 5 days a week, is another chance for you to bear down.